Hey everybody, welcome to this chat. My name's Naimo, I'm the Head of Online and Games at Screen Australia, and it is really great to be speaking to you all today here at just about the halfway point of GCAP, so well done, you've made it this far. We'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands that we're gathered on today, the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present. Acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded and always was, always will be Aboriginal land. I'd like to also extend that respect to any First Nations people working in game making and game development, particularly some who are being showcased here in the local lounge. If you haven't had a chance to check out Blacktasia by Guck in the local lounge, it's here every day, so please do make a chance to have a play of that. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, we'll talk more about the local lounge later on today. Before we kick off into the chat, just to give you a bit of a table of contents of what we're going to talk about, I'm going to introduce the rest of the team. We'll talk through Screen Australia and the history of games funding at the agency. We're going to cover different funds that are on offer under our games funding, game support. We're going to talk through some myths, and we're going to bust some myths today around things we've learned over the last couple of years and the kind of questions we get asked and maybe whether they're true or false. And then we're going to give you some tips about our funds and how to best position yourself for a competitive application. So, moving through that, we've decided to sit in order of the slide as well. So to introduce the rest of the team, we have Amelia, Laughlan, Chad Toprak and Dakoda Barker, all three whom are games investment managers based here in the Melbourne office of Screen Australia. They will be sharing this talk with me, so it won't just be me you're listening to today. But before we move on, I thought we'd just give a bit of an intro and an overview of what Screen Australia is and what we do. It is relatively recently that we're back into games funding, so we totally appreciate a lot of people may not be familiar with what we are. We're a federal government body. We fund film and TV and online projects across all different genres. We also fund games, of course, and we'll get into that in a minute. We fund projects across all different states and territories, so we do often, particularly in games, get confused for different state agencies, most often Vic Screen, but our remit is Australia-wide, so we're here to share the love of funding across the whole country. And it's really important to note that our remit is largely cultural and artistic, so we're looking for projects that have cultural and artistic value rather than necessarily being economically or commercially valuable in the first instance, or primarily led by that lens. We're complementary to state agency funding rather than being mutually exclusive. So you can have a project that has Screen Australia funding and Vic Screen or Screen Queensland or any other state or territory agency funding in that finance plan. And that is actually a competitive approach. To talk a little bit about specifically games at Screen Australia, some of you in the room may be aware that the Australian Interactive Games Fund was active at Screen Australia for a couple of years, many years ago. That was then ended and we didn't have game support for a long time. And then in 2022, when the Digital Games Tax Offset, or the DGTO, was announced, we saw that as an opportunity to get back into games funding for specifically independent games with budgets under $500,000. So our support is complementary rather than overlapping with the DGTO. So when you apply, we need to be confident that your game has a budget of under that level. We started off with the Games Expansion Pack for a couple of years, which was a bit of a one-size-fits-all release fund for games. We ran that for 2 financial years. We funded 62 games and got over $8 million out the door, which I think we heard that we were getting back in games funding in December of 2021 and had to get that fund open and money out the door by the end of June. So shout out to Tim Phillips and Amelia who helped support all of those great projects through that fund very quickly. We also activated the First Nations Game Studio Fund and funded 2 studios through that fund, Guck and Awesome Black. And then, as part of the National Cultural Policy Revive, we were allocated $12 million over 4 years for games funding. Just to be super clear, that's not $12 million per year, it's $12 million over the 4 years, which means $3 million per year for those of you who need help with the maths. So again, complementary to the offset, and since we've been in games funding, we've supported over 120 projects and over $12 million out the door, which is something we're very, very proud to have done. We see that game support continuing in a very similar fashion over the next few years, and we're going to talk about those specific funds that kind of evolved from the Games Expansion Pack now and talk through those core funds and some of the other funds that we've initiated and opened. So I'm going to throw over to Dakoda. Thanks, Dakoda.
Yeah, no worries. So as Lee said, the Games Expansion Pack was a one-size-fits-all approach. And after we realized we had dedicated funding, we could think about what kind of comes next, what shape that would be. And after a lot of communication with industry, chatting to people who are game makers, we realized there are a few different approaches we could and needed to take. The Games Production Fund is the sort of direct descendant of Games Expansion Pack. It's the kind of major production fund for up to $100,000 of grant money, not recoupable. So when we give you that money, you keep it. Please spend it on your game. We don't want it back. But the really key difference was Games Expansion Pack was a release fund. And so you had to release, that's the kind of the key deliverable there. But the way the games industry works and the way that everyone works on their projects means that release is not necessarily the milestone you want to target. It might not be the right next step for you and your project. So for the Games Expansion Pack, the flexibility comes in because it's based around you telling us what significant milestone you want and scaffolding your application around that. That allows us to give you the support you need in order to take your game to whatever stage it needs to be at, whether it's a vertical slice to show off to publishers, whether it's an alpha playtest so you can use it for crowdfunding or to get some audience feedback, or whether it's early access so you can move into that kind of penultimate stage to start getting some extra revenue to fund the rest of development. So Games Production Fund is currently closed at the moment. We're in the middle of assessment, so please forgive us for being very bedraggled. But it will reopen again at the end of the year. And you can always check our website for guidelines, handy tips, as well as when the next upcoming funds are. So keep that in mind. I'm going to pass to you, Chad, to tell us about Emerging Game Makers Fund.
Sure thing. So as we were working on Games Expansion Pack, we noticed two things. One was that we were getting a lot of demand from people who were just starting out, people who might not have had time or the resources to work on a prototype. The other thing that really stood out to us, and this is no surprise, is that a lot of us are indies. Not a lot of us have companies set up. Some of us are just making games at home, sort of at a sole trader capacity. We didn't want to exclude those independent game developers. We acknowledge how important that work is, and so we created the Emerging Game Makers Fund. It's a really exciting fund that really allows people to get started, to create their prototype, which would then make them eligible for things like the Games Production Fund, which you do need a prototype and need to be a company to apply for. The Emerging Game Makers Fund is up to $30,000, and we don't recoup that back, so that's all for you. And it's $30,000 for you to produce a prototype or a micro-scale game. So we also acknowledge that not all games are massive hundreds of thousands of dollars of funding. Some games are tiny, and they also need to exist. So another really cool thing about the Emerging Game Makers Fund is that we really encourage people to experiment. Like Australia is really well known for its weird, wacko experimental games, and we love that. And we want to encourage a space and to foster that. So that's something that we really love to see. Much like the Games Production Fund, the Emerging Game Makers Fund is currently closed, and the next round will open on the 17th of December. I might now pass it on to Amelia to tell you about the Future Leaders Delegation.
Thanks, Chad. So while we were out there doing Expansion Pack and speaking to literally hundreds of game makers about the challenges that they face, another challenge that came up again and again was the difficulty of underrepresented folk to break into leadership roles. And one of the key ways that people grow their careers in games is through attending bigger conferences and events such as GDC, the Game Developers Conference in San Francisco. So for anyone who's not familiar with GDC, the scale of it is really hard to comprehend if you haven't been to that sort of thing before. So for an idea of the scale scale, GCAP attracts around 1,000 attendees, GDC attracts around 30,000, and it's a business-to-business event. So this means that it is targeted at game makers, unlike some of the even bigger footfall events that are targeting consumers. But because it's business-to-business, it's a really great opportunity for people who want to take their career to the next stage by making connections, by going to interesting talks over there, getting connections with people to grow their network and really grow their career. So the Future Leaders Delegation is an opportunity to receive financial assistance to get over to GDC, up to $10,000, but it is also a sort of support framework. A lot of people say that going to GDC for the first time is so overwhelming that you really can't make good use of it. What we want to do through the Future Leaders Delegation is equip you with everything you need to make your first GDC like your second GDC. So how do we do that? We hook you up with a mentor who's going to support you throughout your journey, someone who's been to GDC before and is within your discipline, so can advise you on who to meet, where to go, which parties to attend. And then we also run a workshop, a 2-day workshop, and we cover travel expenses for that as well. So we bring you together, you all get to meet each other, and we start to sort of take you through some detailed advice on what it's like on the ground and what to do. The Future Leaders Delegation is open for applications at the moment, and it closes on the 17th of October. You can see up here our cohort from this year: Jojo, Emma, Jess, Jared and Jay. That is, yes, Emma and the 4 J's. You don't have to have a J name to apply.
That does help.
They will be starting a band. No, So all 5 of them are here at GCAP this year. So if you see them around, please do ask them about their experience. Jared's in the audience, he's waving his hand, and so is Jay. Do you mind putting your hands up? Are Jojo or Emma or anyone else here? No? Okay, yep, so you can bombard them with questions about what that was like. So this year we'll be supporting 6 people to go as well. So that's that opportunity. And we will be in the local lounge after this. So if you want to talk about that program, please do come and ask us questions. I'll now pass to Chad to talk about events.
Great, thank you. Just as important to games and game development, I think, the games, festivals and events that surround it. There's a reason why we're all here. You know, it's a great opportunity to network, to meet, to mingle. There's so many reasons as to why events, conferences, festivals are incredibly integral to the culture and the foundation of a healthy and vibrant sector, which is why we have the Games, Festivals and Events Fund. Basically, it's an all year round open grant, and you can apply for between $10,000 to $100,000, and you use this money to sort of elevate the events that you're putting on, to sort of take them to the next level, to scale and sort of reach a new scale that you otherwise wouldn't be able to without that support. You must be a company or an incorporated entity to be eligible, and this is just to make sure that we don't have people applying for beers and pizzas in the backyard. That's not the sort of event that we're supporting here. You don't have to have a track record of having hosted events. It can be a first-time event as well, and basically where the grant is there to support and uplift the industry and the community. It's been quite amazing actually to see all the interesting events and event organisers sort of come out of the woods since announcing this grant. One advice we have is to apply early, ideally 4 months before the event takes place. This ensures that sort of we can have ample time to assess the application, to get back to you if there's things missing or if we have inquiries, and to ensure that you're contracted and that you get the money well ahead of the event. Games, Festivals and Events Fund. If you've got any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We're always happy to answer your questions. Oh yeah, it is open all year round.
Thanks, Chad. I might just jump in on that one as well, because it's important to note that all these 4 funds are coming out of that same $3 million per year, so we don't have additional money for these funds, but we wanted to make it clear how important things like festivals and events are to us to support them. But one of the requirements of that fund is to talk to us before you apply. Just the festivals and events funds. The other funds, we don't necessarily have capacity to chat to everybody before you apply. But for festivals and events, we really want to understand the capacity and the scope of your event and give you a bit of a steer on, how eligible or applicable that might be for funding. So please do reach out early for that one if you're interested in chatting to us. But note as well, I know that I sound like I'm crying poor, but we just don't have any extra money for that. So any money we fund for a festival or event does mean that's 1 or 2 or more games that we can't support. So we're just trying to find that balance. While I've got the mic and I'm talking, I'll talk about another fund that we have, and that is the Skills Development Fund. So one of our missions at Screen Australia is to integrate games funding and support across other areas of the agency. That's a long-term goal and mission. And one of the areas that also supports games is our Skills Development Fund under the Industry Development team and unit. So actually, our Head of Industry Development, Ken Crouch, is here today in the front row. Thanks, Ken. Please chat to Ken if you are interested in this fund. This is a fund and a program that's a little more applicable to medium to larger size studios, not exclusively, but we do find that they are better placed because you need at least 3 people employed in your studio to be eligible for the funding. This is funding for training and development, not wages, but the development of staff to upskill or to skill in a different area that they may not necessarily have those skills in. You can apply for up to $80,000. And it's open until 7th of November, but then I believe another fund opens the next day. So there tends to always be an opportunity to apply for industry development in terms of a fund open. It's a really great opportunity, and we've already seen a number of great game studios get support through the Industry Development Fund. We really hope to see more, so please do chat to us or to Ken if you're interested in that, particularly in that training or development area of your studio. Now that we've talked about some of our funds, and we are going to display a link to a QR code that links to the website for all of those funds later on as well, we just want to bust a few myths and talk about some of the questions or the dare I say, accusations that we get, having been in this role and being back in games for a couple of years now, because we're in this really privileged position to see literally hundreds of applications come to us. And we're funding hundreds of those games, and we want to support as many as we can, and we want to support a really diverse, in every sense, slate of games. So the first one is you only support cozy games. You can probably guess that is fiction. The first draft of this slide, that just said wrong, but we thought it was too aggressive, so we've said that's in our game of fact or fiction, that is fiction. We've actually pulled the stats, Dakoda pulled the stats from all of our funded games so far, so these are successful applications. These are all the different genres of games that we've supported over the last 2 and a bit years in funding games. So cozy games might come under that kind of wholesome banner. Important to note that games can choose multiple genres or categories. So this isn't 120, this is more. But games have self-selected and identified as various different genres that we've supported. So don't feel like if your game isn't cozy that you can't bring it to us. We want to support a whole different range of genres of games across the gamut.
Another thing that people often, I guess, are intimidated about when it comes to funding is where they're making games from. So as Screen Australia, we have what was that on? Yes. As Screen Australia, we have the huge privilege of being able to see applications from all over Australia. And actually, we really, really want you to be able to make no matter where you are. So which button? Okay. So it is not true that we only fund things from certain states. We fund from all over Australia. We have 2 graphs here. So the first one is successful applications by state, and then the next one is the population density of Australia by state. So as you can see, like obviously we're never going to be funding the same amount from a more populous state as a less populous state, but we do keep in mind population density and try to fund proportionate to population across Australia. So it doesn't matter where you're making, we really want to hear from you. We want you to be able to make no matter where you are, or because of where you are. It's often really interesting ideas come from less represented places. Dakoda.
We are often asked whether or not we fund certain types of games on certain types of platforms. One of the common ones I've heard, even in my short time at Screen Australia, is that we don't fund mobile games. It is categorically untrue. We do in fact fund mobile games. I have another double set of graphs for you. So the first one here is successful applications. As you can see, it is in fact overwhelmingly PC. Again, like the genres, games can self-select more than one platform, so some of these are crossovers. But we have an okay spread of platforms. But the next slide shows the applications that we receive. So this is across all 850 applications we've received this far. We can only fund stuff if we get it. So if you think a platform is underrepresented among the games that we're funding, apply for those platforms. We're relatively proportional. I'm pretty satisfied with how we've been doing so far. But if you don't apply for a target platform you think games should be on, then the games won't get funded. They won't end up on that platform. So please make sure you're putting those applications in and targeting the platforms you care about.
The next myth, you don't fund escape rooms. That's true. We gotcha. The clue's in the name, Screen Australia. We need to fund games that are primarily accessible via a screen. So we've had conversations about, I've got a board game and there's a digital companion that helps you keep score for the board game. That wouldn't be eligible because the board game is the primary game. So we're looking at things where the game is primarily played or accessed on a screen. Final myth.
We often get asked if we keep IP, like if government somehow ends up owning your game. This is, in fact, fiction, and it's the complete opposite. We actually want you to keep your IP, and we encourage that. And it's in our contracts. It's something that we're very mindful of as an Australian government entity. We really want to bolster original IP in Australia by Australians.
And finally, my favourite thing, you wouldn't believe the sorts of questions that we get about people's health, about people's tags. I wish that I had access to a giant hive mind of all information. That would be so cool. I love Star Trek, go the Borg. Unfortunately, my brain is small and there are definitely a lot of things that we can't help you with. So can we help you with things like tax rebate, setting up business Medicare, etc.? This is fiction. Please get a lawyer. Please speak to a tax accountant. Please speak to a doctor if you have a health problem. We always do our best to help, and we are aware of a lot of resources being in these jobs, so we'll always do our best to send you, links to information where you can learn more. But I would hate to advise you on your tax because I definitely wouldn't be doing it correctly. So this is something that, yes, we do not help with. We're now just going to... Oh, did you want to...
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that, the phrase we say a lot is it's actually not our business to help you with your business. And so that is a really common one of, can you help me get an ABN or set up my proprietary limited company? And the answer is no. We are now going to talk about some tips around competitive applications and things that we think may help you, may be worth keeping in mind as you progress on the journey of government funding and filling out grant applications.
I think the first one that's probably most important to us is for you to find your weird. We often get asked, what type of games are you looking for? Are there any particular types or flavors of games that get funded or that you want to see? The answer is no. We really want you to come to us with something that you're excited about. We really want you to find your weird. Come to us with your interesting, unique, experimental ideas. We love to see things that don't exist, that are unique, that are original, and for you to truly embrace that. So one of our top advices is to come to us with your weird, unique idea.
A long time ago, I applied for government funding at Screen Queensland and was unsuccessful. And that sucks and it hurts, and we know that is an experience that a lot of people who apply for our funding go through as well. Last financial year, we received 400 applications, and we cannot fund 400 applications however much we might like to. So, unfortunately, necessarily, some people get declines, and some of those declines are very deserving of funding as well. But as creatives, as people working in the creative field, failure is an important part of that process and can in fact be a really important way to develop, refine and enhance your project to make it either eligible for funding or more competitive for funding next time, or just to overall improve the quality of the end product, help you refine your practice and improve your career prospects long term. So as much as it sucks to receive that decline, please keep in mind that there are ways in which to make that a more positive experience for you. And we're not doing, so we're not kind of rejecting applications willy-nilly. We take that very seriously. It's an emotional labour for us as well, because we know there are a lot of Australian game makers deserving of support, and we can't give the financial support, but we are working as hard as we can to provide support in as many ways as possible.
Something I would just add to that is that a lot of successful applications are reapplications. So you can actually come in twice to the funding with the same project. And for the Games Production Fund, we do pre-application calls. So if you've been declined, you can come in and talk to us about the game. And we've had a lot of feedback from teams sort of a few months down the line about how that feedback sort of enhanced their project, helped them along the way. So do keep that in mind as well. I'm now just going to talk about two different points about competitive applications. The first one, just allow me to put my producer hat on for a moment. Being clear and consistent is key to a good application. So obviously applications can be really different for really different types of games, but grant writing as a skill, this is a whole skill that some people do full time, is a really different skill to game making, obviously. So naturally, not everyone's naturally good at it. It's probably most akin to something that you've all done before, which is applying for a job. And when you're applying for a job, especially one that you really want, you're not just going to do it at the 11th hour. You're not just going to leave it down to typos and mistakes in your career timeline, those sorts of things. You're going to put your all into it. And I really, really recommend taking the same approach when you're applying for a grant. So if you know that, spelling is not your forte or you struggle with details, get onto your friends who are good at that. Get onto your parents, your relatives. Things like your pitch video, where that's your sort of one chance to give us a first impression of you and your project and your team. Get your auntie or your uncle who doesn't know anything about games to watch it and tell you back what they think you're talking about. Take these opportunities, draw on your community to put forward an application that is coherent and makes sense. What will often happen, what always happens with applications is you'll start reading and, we're looking for evidence in there that this is a strong application that we can take and pitch upwards for funding. But a weak application will sort of unravel. You look at one date in one part and then it might be a different date somewhere else. There's some team members over here and, this team member isn't mentioned in the budget, so are they getting paid or not? These sorts of simple inconsistencies can really trip you up. So make sure to pay attention to those. The second thing I want to talk about is a little different. So in the team, obviously we have, over 400 applications submitted last year, but we also have this big pile of unsubmitted applications that people never hit submit on. And then there's this other pile of applications that we talk about all the time, which are the people who were never brave enough in the first place to even start the application. And we're always thinking about how can we reach those people. I know that for myself, getting into games, getting a start in the space was a really long and sordid journey. And it wasn't until I attended a very special event that Girl Geek Academy put on in, I think, 2017 or 2018, which was called She Makes Games. And it was a conference for women and gender diverse folk. It was really small. It was probably only about 30 or 40 people in the room. But I remember they flew in a speaker from overseas who had been a programmer at prominent AAA studios. She'd already persisted in the space for over 10 years at that stage. And just being there and seeing someone like that who had survived and being in a room like that, it was extremely meaningful and it helped me feel valid in the space for the first time in my life. And it's not a struggle that ends. Anyone who's a minority in games knows this. It's something that you feel like you just keep coming up against all throughout your career. And so what I want to say to anyone out there who's feeling that way is please don't mute yourself. All throughout your life, there's going to be a lot of people telling you no. So don't be the person to say no to yourself. Is the funding for me? You're never going to know unless you put your hat in the ring. It very well might be. So please don't mute yourself. Give your project a chance.
Thanks, Amelia. We're so greedy. We have over 800 applications and we want more, but we really do, and we really want to hear from you. A couple of just things, some advice. I won't go through all of these, but the one I want to highlight is the middle one, read the trends report. So we really try our hardest to give feedback. We got in the last round over 125 applications for the Emerging Game Makers Fund. We can't give individual bespoke feedback to every one of those unsuccessful applicants. So we put together these trends reports across each fund, Emerging Game Makers and Games Production Funds. We put a lot of care and thought and effort into these. We pull statistics, we pull common themes and trends that we've seen. They're quite a few pages long. I think they're 6 or 7 or 8 pages long. And we put them up on the website as soon as we can once we've made our decisions on funding. They're publicly accessible, and we really advise you to read them, even if you haven't applied, to get a sense of what kind of common threads or themes are working for both competitive and non-competitive applications. So please engage with those, with the FAQs, with the guidelines. And then we also have a program operations team who are the front line of taking inquiries. Once you've engaged with all of these materials, if you still have questions, you can reach out to games@screenaustralia.gov.au to find out more. And speaking of links and handy places to access, here is a bit of a quick recap of all of our funds, and that QR code will take you to the landing page for games, which links to all of the 4 core games funds, and then you want to probably just do a Screen Australia site search of industry development or skills development fund for the final one there. We are now going to head into some Q&As, but before we do that, I just want to let you know for the next hour after this talk, we're going to be in the Screen Australia local lounge. Hopefully you've already checked it out, but if you haven't, come and play some of the games that we've funded. There's different games each day, so the lineup today will be completely different to tomorrow. And today specifically is a showcase of gender diverse-led games that we've supported. So please do check them out and play them. It's actually a really good way to get a sense of the kind of projects we're funding and how distinct and unique they are. Obviously, they've come a long way since they were funded, but yeah, get amongst it and play some games at this games event. Room 105. It's got the Screen Australia banners out the front. That's all from us. Drew's going to help us with questions so we can answer any questions that people may have. But thank you very much.
Thank you all so much. Just on the cultural significant point, is there a specific sort of criteria you're looking for that, or any sort of themes or anything like that you're sort of looking for in the titles that you're funding as part of Yeah,
it's a good question. It's really hard to pin down exactly what cultural significance means. We're not looking necessarily for games that are dinky-die Australian. It's not going to hurt if it is, but we want, I guess, your experience of what the game is for you. But we've also funded games that like Gubbins, for example. That's a word game with a particular sensibility and sense of humour. It's not instantly necessarily recognisable as being Australian. So there's not a specific criteria for that in games. There is a requirement that 90% or more of the game is made in Australia and is under the creative control of Australian citizens or permanent residents. Being taxpayer funding, we need to make sure that funding is going back to Australian citizens or permanent residents. Does anyone want to add anything to that?
I guess just that what Australia looks like is a really diverse thing, right? So a great game that we funded in the last round, or one of the rounds, is called Zodiac Mountain, and it's a lot about Chinese mythology and culture, but it's made by a team of predominantly Chinese Australians. And so at the first glance, it's not Australiana, but it's got a lot of cultural truth behind it. So I think authenticity is a really important thing to think about in terms of what you want to bring to us. Games also don't have to be like narrative driven, even though I know that has historically been the case with some screen agencies, but yeah, it can be any genre, as we tried to myth bust before.
So on some of these, it has a requirement that you're a company. Is that one thing where you can apply where you are not a company, but with the expressed interest that if you get funded, you would be producing a company with it?
For the Emerging Game Makers Fund, yes, you can be a sole trader or a company. For the Games Production Fund, you need to be a company at time of applying. So you can't apply with, if I get the funding, I'll incorporate. It's got to be, before you hit submit, you've got to be a incorporated company.
For obviously things like the Emerging Game Makers Fund, it's easy to be like, all right, I've done all the things that are required. To show off more, I can be like, here's more of a prototype, here's more of what we've done. But for the Emerging Game Makers Fund, beyond just the ideation and concepting, what else would be something you can do to be competitive beyond just because you only have the like 10 slides and the 3-minute pitch deck. What else can you really add?
In terms of extra materials?
Extra
you mean?
material.
Yeah, so you can submit any supplementary materials to your application. I think the best way to think about supplementary materials are what questions do you think an assessment panel is going to have about your application that is not answered in the core materials? So in the case that you do have some sort of gameplay, some prototype, something you've already been testing, you can include some footage of that in your slides. It really is the sky's the limit in terms of what supplementary material you want to attach, but I really encourage you to think about it in that lens of like, what question is this answering for the assessment panel? We do get people attaching, you know, their entire business strategy, their entire game design document. You know, it depends on why it's there as to whether it's useful. If in your creative pitch deck, it's a very systems-heavy game and you're like, reference page 67 for the exact card mechanics, you know, that might be something we want to drill down on because there are a lot of Slay the Spire likes coming out lately. But yeah, just really think about the why of why you would be attaching extra materials would kind of be my suggestion, but that supplementary materials field does sort of take whatever you want to submit there.
Yeah, I just want to be really specific. Like, if you think, like, don't just provide us information, contextualize it, tell us why we need to know this. It's no good just, here's 100 documents, please read them all, because we get a lot of applications and we want to give everyone a fair shake. But if you give us a whole bunch of stuff and don't put it in context, then it will be difficult for us to understand what you're trying to communicate. The really important thing is that consistency throughout the entire application, and that means pointing at this is what you need to pay attention to and why.
One other form of support material that hasn't been mentioned yet is letters of support. Those are really great to see as well.
Cool. Let's go down the back too, I reckon.
Yeah, let's go down the back. Any in the back? Yeah, all the way back here. Here you go.
Hi, I was just wondering, with the Emerging Game Makers Fund and games production, if someone has applied for the Emerging Game Makers Fund and then they made a prototype, can they then use that prototype to go for the games production fund, or is it like, will it make it easier for them to apply for that, or is it going to be like a refresh, like a new different process again? Thank you.
Yeah. You can definitely apply. In fact, in our minds, it is a bit of a pipeline. Obviously, it's not guaranteed and you're still in a competitive process. But absolutely, you can use that prototype to then apply for the Games Production Fund.
Just to add, they are separate applications though, so you need to acquit that Emerging Game Makers Fund, like, you know, make that prototype and then apply to the next fund, the Games Production Fund, after that. So it's, yeah, two different applications.
Thank you for the talk. This is a bit niche question, but is any of these funding limited to citizenship?
As in, do you need to be a citizen to be eligible? So the main, I think the best way to think about it is the game needs to be under the primary creative control of either Australian citizens or Australian permanent residents. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Cool, thanks.
10 minutes. Got one over here. Here you go.
I just had a question. So with the Games Production Fund and the Games Festival and Events Fund, you have to be like incorporated. With a lot of these applications, I imagine that incorporating as a business would be something that people are doing for the first time, potentially even in order to apply for these rounds of funding. I'm wondering if the Skills Development Fund can be applied for kind of in tandem to support skills development for maybe like the business aspects. So if you wanted to start a small business and make a game through the Games Production Fund, but also have like, you know, maybe 10K for business development support and skills training for the people working on it, but also a lot of those people tend to be contractors, not employees. So that might be a long question, but I'm just wondering if the Skills Development Fund can work in tandem with the other ones.
I'm just reading Ken's mind and he's telling me that you need to be incorporated to apply for the Skills Development Fund?
You need to be incorporated for a company to do that.
I think if maybe the core of the question is also around like what is the scope of the skills development fund? Is that fair to say? Like, could it extend to business support? Come on up, Care.
Yes, it can look at business skills and training, but it would be probably within a structured business where they are supporting mid-career practitioners who are stepping up into more senior roles or supervisory roles. It is quite a flexible fund, so I'm really happy to talk about what it can and can't do. But yeah, it's not a entry-level emerging practitioner to create a business fund. There are probably other resources available on the net to support that type of stuff, but in terms of funding, that's not the purpose of the fund.
Hi, thank you for really great information today. You mentioned earlier that when you were talking about competitive applications, pre-application feedback, did I hear that correctly, and how do we get in touch to sort of organise that?
Yeah, sorry, that was a little misleading. So if you have applied and been unsuccessful, that's when you can come in for the pre-application feedback. Mm-hmm. So that's when that would apply. Basically, when you get the email saying that your project hasn't been successful, you get details and like a booking link about that. So that's sort of the context in which we would be giving that feedback. We unfortunately can't review application materials prior to an official submission, just because of sort of fairness across all applications. So, but we're definitely happy to chat about like how to apply if you're a first-time applicant. If you have any questions, we're really happy to try to demystify that process for you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Hi, just asking a question following up about the serially using, say, a Game Makers Fund and the Game Production Fund. Say a studio has a game idea which has different potential scopes. Can you apply for multiple of these on obviously different scoped versions of the same kind of core ideas, or do they have to be completely distinct, or can you only apply for one at one time?
Can I just clarify, you mean could you apply in the same round with different kind of iterations of the same game? Or do you mean
like imagine there's a small version of the game and a big version of the game, and you think the small version is a good fit for emerging game makers and the big version is a good fit for games production. So in the one round, put in two applications, making clear that they have the different scopes that are appropriate to the two different sizes.
Gotcha. No, we would want you to pick one, essentially. So there's a lot of... This is kind of a common theme of questions as well, of like, which game should I apply with? Or the version of your question, which version of my game should I apply with? We really want you to do that work and to really think about what's the ideal game that you want to make. Let's say you applied with the big version that was unsuccessful, and our feedback was maybe the scope was too big. Well, then that might be the advice to redirect that. But a lot of that kind of pre-application work to think about what's the ideal version of this game that you really want to make, we leave that to you.
Yeah, makes sense.
Thanks.
I've seen a few competitive applications that, in talking about the scope of their project, acknowledge like what successful funding would enable and what they will do if unsuccessful. We don't necessarily want to see like your application, here's 10 variations on what this could be, but I think thinking about what the scope of the project looks like based on what finance is available does show that you're thinking about what's practical and what's viable, which are elements of the criteria that we assess upon. So it is still important or valuable, I think, to be like, here's the range in which I'm operating. This is what I'm shooting for if I'm successful, but here's how I'm going to scale down. And that helps us show kind of, I guess, a level of maturity and understanding about the realities and practicalities of making games in capitalism, basically.
That's super useful, thank you.
I think it boils down to like risk mitigation as well. Like we'll have some projects that have pending grants from other agencies, and being able to identify your fallback plans if those are unsuccessful, I think will make your application more competitive.
I have time for one more. Hi, thank you so much, team. Really appreciate the talk. I think it's really useful to a lot of us here. I've got a lot of questions, and I've tried to pick one that might be achievable that kind of covers a few of them together. I wanted to hone in on something that you said, Chad. You said that letters of support, are really good in terms of helping your application. How far does that extend? And would it perhaps make some of the criteria that you've deployed to these grants flexible? Or are you more talking the letter of support is saying, we think this is a good game? Specifically, only companies would a letter of support from a particular organisation or industry veteran say, maybe make that more flexible? Or are we really set on a lot of those criteria? Because I know that it's difficult with the policy side of things.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of letters of support, we're basically looking for, especially at the earlier career stage where they might not have a portfolio of projects that can vouch for them, having letters of support from their peers or from industry, whether they're veterans or from particular organisations, is just a bit of extra backing that sort of will support the application and the applicant and the team specifically.
Potentially, to that first question that was asked, make you say, we would feel more comfortable that you're not quite a company yet, but you will. That sort of is not.
No. So letters of support can't make us flexible on the eligibility criteria. The eligibility criteria are set. The 4 assessment criteria are creative merit, viability, impact, and D&I. In terms of letters of support, I think often the function that they're playing is enhancing your viability. But like I said before, any supplementary material to an application should be clearly contextualised. So a letter of support could also be relevant to the creative merit. Say that you want to work with a particular other artist whose work you've already identified. The letter of support could be from that artist saying, yes, I definitely want to collaborate with this person. Or it could be something more like Chad's saying is to do with the viability, right? This person is new to games, maybe they're transferring from another industry, but they've made great connections and this person is vouching for their kind of journey through that. So again, it's all about contextualising why this is a good thing to add to your application.
Cool. I think that's time. Thanks so much, Screen Australia.